What's up, everybody? Welcome in to another edition of SSPN Live. I know it's been a little bit since we've done a live edition. The past 2 weeks, we've been talking some Olympics. Our last episode we thought was going to be like 15 minutes. It ended up being 40 minutes. So
Nope.
we probably could have gone live for that one, Ethan. But regardless, we are back here today to talk the end of the Olympics. We got one more game to go over that was pretty thrilling. And of course, a great performance from Victor Wembanyama, our budding beloved star in San Antonio, putting on a great performance in his first ever gold medal game against the United States of America. And I have a feeling, Ethan, that the next time that game happens, it might go a little bit differently. But I don't want to get too ahead of myself. There's a lot that can happen in the next 4 years, but definitely something I think Wemby will be remembering over the next 4 years. But with the Olympics being over, it's season preview time. I know it's August. I know it kind of feels like a dead time period, but over the next 5 weeks, we're going to be doing our position previews. We're going to be jumping into this Spurs roster and really getting in to just some substantive Spurs talk, my guy. What are your thoughts on both of those events before we get into some little Spurs tidbits before both of those topics?
Right. So to touch on the Olympics first, very happy that Team USA won first and foremost. I was rooting for America, unlike a lot of Spurs fans. I feel like they were rooting for Victor Wembanyama, but I wanted him to do well, which he did. But I also wanted the Team USA win, which they ended up pulling out. And I think this really came down to the experience and all the things that everyone's been talking about with Team USA. It's a lot of Hall of Famers, a lot of All Stars that have been around. They've had big games at the highest levels in the NBA. And then LeBron James, obviously, with Kevin Durant, with that experience at Olympic basketball as well, they were able to pull it out late with an incredible shooting performance from Steph Curry. But with all that being said, I think it's important to note how well Victor did play at this age, at this high of a level. And clearly it mattered to him because of how he was weeping after the game and hugged it. I believe it was his mother post game pretty much immediately. And I think he had a quote saying like, "We'll be back" or something like that. In 4 years, which they absolutely will. I know they'll be without Evan Fournier and Nicholas Batum and honestly possibly Rudy Gobert at that point in his career. I'm not sure exactly how old he is, but they'll also have Bilal Coulibaly. They'll have Zachary Rissache, Alexandre Sarr. So they have a lot of young talent that in 4 years might be at that point to challenge Team USA. But at the same time, you got Anthony Edwards. He'll take another 4-year step. You'll have a series of other. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Chet Holmgren's another name.
That's a
Paolo
great name.
Banchero.
Great names. Great
Cooper
names.
Flag.
Cooper Flag. I forget Jason Tatum. I don't think he'll come back. I don't think we'll have any Boston Celtics coming back to Team USA. But there will be a series of young Americans that we didn't get to see this year with significant roles. So I think it'll be more competitive at the very least. But I feel like we've been seeing that the past few Olympics in a row, just more and more competitiveness, which I'm a fan of because at the end of the day, it's more fun to watch competitive basketball. You know what I mean? And then just to get into some actual Spurs discussions, do with these player breakdowns, positional breakdowns. It's exciting for us because finally, it's based in reality. It's not so much, the rumor mill or things that we aren't sure about, but it's actual facts. Like we're analyzing rotations, we're analyzing what guys did last year, how they can contribute this year. So I think a lot of the people in the comments will be excited for that as well.
Yes, absolutely, Ethan. Just to give my little thoughts on that gold medal game, like you said, obviously a really good performance from Wemby. That clutch three he hit late in the game, as well as the one that started off the game to kind of set the tone. Obviously, Team USA went on their runs where they were able to kind of hold a double-digit lead for the majority of the game. But, man, France kept fighting back. And again, I think the other thing that we saw is with Rudy Gobert's minutes kind of in question throughout the tournament, you just saw the difference that you have with Victor on the floor, bluntly. I know it's FIBA. I know it's a little bit of a different game, but this kind of goes back to the Defensive Player of the Year discussion. As much as, we both thought Rudy Gobert was going to get it, and we get the kind of NBA politics of the award, even though we're Spurs fans and we're Wemby lovers, if you will, I still feel like objectively he was the most impactful defensive player in the NBA this season, and I think that showed in the Olympic tournament also.
1,000%, because I mean, like you said, Rudy not being able to play a lot of these games because of matchup difficulties, that's never going to be a question with Victor Wembanyama. The only thing you'll have a question with him is Joel Embiid going to just back him down for 70 points?
Right.
But he can
and that didn't happen.
Did not happen this go around. But he can also defend 1 through 5, where Rudy's really only he's limited to defending big centers, and outside of that, it's a little more, less versatile.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say on the Olympics is obviously what Steph Curry did in the final minutes was just incredible.
Yeah.
Um, Everything that you said about the talent that France is about to get moving forward, 2028, 2032, and even 2036. If you do the math, Victor's going to be 32, 33 in 2036. So,
Right.
I mean, that's not even, I know he's going to play a shorter career. He's talked about that, but that won't even be, you know, when he's 38 or whatever. Like, he'll still kind of be at the last end of his prime during
Mhm.
those next three Olympics. um I'm gonna have them as almost favorites in those in my mind, going into those right now. Obviously, Team USA will get more talent, like we talked about, but I mean, what we saw from Victor this year in the NBA and what we saw from him in the Olympics, imagine him in 4 years, dude, much less 8.
Right. And I'm curious, in 4 years, will his brother be eligible to be playing alongside him?
I know the Traore brothers are another name. I don't know
Mhm.
too much about them. I believe one is in the G League as of right now, and another is, I believe, a part of the 2025 class.
Mm,
Maybe it's the 2026 class. Y'all can correct me there, but Nolan Traore is another top
mm.
tier French prospect coming up that may be on that team as well. I mean, think about it, dude. Remember our guy Pacome Dadier?
Yeah,
If
yeah.
he turns into a role player, that would be nice to have off the bench. Or shoot, who knows what happens? Probably with the rest of that lineup, he would come off the bench. But if he can carve out an NBA career for himself, that's another NBA role player that team could have. We could go on about this forever, but the
Mhm.
point is, the future of French basketball, you could argue, has never been brighter.
100%.
Well, that also brings us into our next topics here, Ethan. And that is not the point guard breakdown, but there is some Spurs news. We are going to get into the point guard breakdown, but not just this second. So there's some little tidbits that have came out. Brandon Boston was signed to a training camp deal. I believe Nathan Mensah was the name who was cut on there, because you can only have 21 players coming in to training camp. Y'all can correct that in the comments if you would like, if I got that wrong, but I believe I saw that, which is sad because I really liked what Nathan Mensah brought to the table. But I was thinking about this kind of before we went live. Honestly, with Charles Bassey coming off the injury and missing so much time, it seems like he's probably fully healed at this point and probably needs those reps more than a Nathan Mensah anyway. Um, Obviously, you don't want him to re-injure himself, but with how long he's been out, I think you probably want to use those reps to get him back in the swing of things and physicality and whatnot. And also, Brandon Boston was, he's floated around the league for a while, but I think he is a little bit of a higher value than someone like a Nathan Mensah. Again, this is very similar to Malachi Flynn, someone who's not going to make the roster if we're just being completely honest. But I do think it was a little upgrade talent wise for the training camp roster, which I think is what Brian Wright was trying to do.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement 100%. It's not anything game changing. He won't be on the official roster, obviously, at the end of the day, but he's probably a little bit more competitive of a wing player to kind of get some of our younger players like Malachi again, Devin Vassell, even Harrison Barnes, who maybe they want to rest him during training camp because he's older and just let Boston get some of those reps. Who knows what the theory is, but at the end of the day, it just comes down to trying to get a more competitive camp.
Yeah, and he's still someone who's 22 years old as well.
Hmm.
They can get a look at him. Maybe if he performs well, he could,
Hmm.
be just someone they eye as a two-way contract down the line.
Yeah.
I doubt that will be the case with all the guys that we already have signed on two-way contracts at the moment. But he did go to Sierra Canyon as well. Played with Bronny James and Zaire Wade at that school. So,
Mm.
he's kind of had the big lights, even though it was just high school. So
Right.
that's not really going to translate too much, but just to give a little bit of background on Brandon Boston Jr. But the main thing I like is, just having another youthful piece in there, and maybe he can impress a little bit and earn a two-way or something.
Fingers crossed. I wouldn't be mad at it, Jude.
Right. Same here. Same here. But the other thing I want to talk about that is Spurs related, I was talking with a friend about this
Uh-huh.
throughout the week, and it's something we haven't really talked about. Chris Paul, otherwise known as CP3, who we're going to get
Mhm.
into a little bit later, his number has always been number 3, which of course belongs to Keldon Johnson.
Yes.
So here's the thing. We kind of know this CP3 thing is most likely, in all likelihood, going to be a 1 year, you know, deal. He signed a 1 year deal. I doubt that it goes on past that because of his age and also just where the Spurs are at, as well as drafting Stephon Castle. So, with that being said, another thing, Keldon says he wears number 3 because of Chris Paul. He was actually inspired by him to wear
Wow.
that number. There's been some articles coming out about that. So that kind of makes me feel like he's going to be willing to give Chris Paul this number, at
Mm.
least for this season. Because here's the thing, like he could get it back next year with the way that this is going to go, in all likelihood, like I mentioned earlier. So I had a thought, not to just completely answer the question that I'm kind of asking you, but I was just thinking about, okay, what number would fit Keldon? Like, what would
Mm.
be another good Keldon number? And the number 0 came to mind. And I was texting a friend of mine about this. I didn't even realize this. And me, of all people, you would think I would know this. He wore number 0 at times in Austin, playing for the Austin
Mm.
Spurs. So
Wow.
he does have some connections to that number. We haven't seen somebody wear a 0 for the Spurs in a while. I believe we have number 00 retired, if I'm remembering that
I think
correctly.
so.
Yeah. Um, so that is my pick for Keldon's number. I think it kind of would match his personality. I think it's a number he's worn before in Austin.
Yeah.
Cowboy Tanaka says Keldon 33. That's his suggestion.
That's
Uh,
Trey Jones's number,
that's
unfortunately.
that's what I was about to say as well. I wouldn't mind that, but that one is already taken, unless Trey Jones switches his number. But I really like the 0. I think it matches him. What are your thoughts on some other potential numbers for Keldon Johnson if inevitably CP3 does end up getting number 3?
No, I love the 0. That was exactly what I was gonna say because, I mean, Russell Westbrook was his favorite player growing up. That's Russell's number. So, I mean, if he wore number 3 to pay homage to CP3, just switch up the story, say, "Oh, I've always wanted 0 because Russell Westbrook's my favorite player."
Yeah, and another thing, this is totally just trying to figure out how to describe this. This is just kind of like a mental thing. This may not be something that comes to fruition,
Mhm.
but it could be an idea for Keldon to like, okay, let me get this new number. Let me kind of reinvent myself a
Mm.
little bit. Just a little thing. Sometimes little things like that kind of can give you a little bit of a kick in the arse, if you will. Not to
Mm.
say Keldon needs that completely, but this is a new role as him moving to, as we saw last year with him moving to the 6-man position and just playing alongside Wemby changes things for everybody on the team. The only person's role who really hasn't changed that much is probably Devin Vassell. Um,
Right.
and still, even then, beforehand, you could maybe argue that he was the number 1 option in isolation situations, and now he's of course second to Wemby when it comes to that. But I just wanted to talk about that because I saw some articles floating around about Keldon saying that that's what inspired him to wear number 3.
Mm.
And because, again, the context of it just being a 1-year rental, and him wearing number 0 in the past for the Austin Spurs, that would definitely be my vote. And I'd be curious to see, because what if Keldon just has a really good season this year? Like, as much as we talk about Keldon and we think of him as like, we know what he is, we forget he's still 24 years old. Like, he's just about to hit his prime. And there's been a lot of turmoil and situational things that we've talked about with Keldon over the years when it comes to his position and his role on the team. So I wonder if he has a really good year, if maybe he'd stick with it. I think probably in all likelihood, he just goes back to number 3, but I'm hoping he gets number 0 and he becomes like, we can give him a nickname like Agent 0 or something.
Mm.
And it's just like him coming into the potential that we've always saw in him.
Hey, man, you never know. Maybe Chris Paul wins a championship this year and we retire number 3. That's my hope.
Right, right. And Spurs Spotlight with Chris was in the comments. He said CP4. That is his vote. I've
Mm.
heard somebody, I've, I don't want to bring this up now that Chris Paul's a Spur. So, Chris Paul, I doubt you will ever see this, but I apologize in advance. I've seen some people say that he should wear number 0 for
Oh, boy.
CP 0 rings. Yeah.
Nah.
I disagree too. It's just ironic that
Yeah, it
now we're
is.
recommending that for Keldon, but
Chris Paul being 3 is, like, it's death and taxes, like, it has to be a thing. He is CP3, that is literally his legal name.
for sure. Cowboy Tanaka says, "Is he the patient
Ooh,
0 of the Spurs rebuild?" I like that.
cowboy.
I like that. I like that. But that was basically what I wanted to talk about. It was something I was thinking about, and I was like, this is something that actually is like a legit thing that we kind of will pay attention to. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to see when we find out about that and when that will be announced, because Harrison Barnes, who was acquired after Chris Paul, was already announced that he's going to be number 40, which was the normal number that he wore kind of across the league.
Shout out Harrison. Consistent.
For show. For show. But Ethan, you ready to get into some Spurs roster talk finally?
I'm ready, brother.
Well, we are just talking about CP3. Let's jump right to him.
Mm.
I'm just going to give it to you. What are the strengths and weaknesses for Chris Paul at the point guard position at 39 years old, playing with this San Antonio Spurs team and Victor Wembanyama?
Right. Well, as what I would say the starting point guard that I would think, or I think he would be the starting point guard going into the season. His strengths are obvious: playmaking, confidence, IQ, having everybody on the team in the right place at the right time, and being a veteran presence both on and off the court. And I think the biggest thing is kind of an intangible. He will not tolerate a losing mentality. He is all about competing and trying to win, and he made that very clear in his opening press conference with the Spurs. He's not here to kind of rest on his loyals. Is that how you say it? Rest on his laurels.
Laurels.
Rest on his laurels. He is not here to do that. He is here to prove again that he is a competitive, high level point guard, and to kind of lead the way for the Spurs moving into the next chapter of their franchise. Weaknesses are going to be obvious. He's not the same athletic point guard that he once was. I don't think he's going to be an elite scorer like he once was. I think he will really just be a facilitator, a floor general, and occasionally hit a mid-range jumper or a floater in the lane. I don't envision him getting like 15 points per game. He'll probably be anywhere from 10 to 13 points per game. But I don't even know if you can call that a weakness. I think that's just the reality of where he is at 39 years old.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there. A lot of stuff that I'll say will be similar. The main thing for me, I'm just excited for us to run like a legit Greg Popovich offense, like
Mm,
where we have somebody who's orchestrating sets, we're calling out plays, really facilitating. I don't want to take too much away from Trey Jones because we'll get into him later as well. And you and I and a lot of people in the comments, we're very happy with the way that he finished the season. But at the same time, Chris Paul is just a different level of player than
right.
a Trey Jones, especially when it comes to being one of the best point guards of all time. So as much as it is a 39-year-old Chris Paul, there are so many intangible things that he can teach these guys and that he can see on the court. The way that he's going to place Wemby on the floor, I think, is going to make Victor's job so much easier. The spacing, I mean, every offensive, like I said, just action that you can have, whether it's in a set or, even in like a little freelance pick and roll play. It's just, I think it's going to be much more smooth and much more connected with Chris Paul at the helm of the offense.
100%. I like the way you put that. Connected. He will make this team 100% more connected.
Yes, the spacing is another thing that stands out to me as well. And just talking about him offensively, as much as you mentioned it there, the floaters and the mid range, I think that there's a lot of times where we haven't been able to make people pay in those situations where I think Chris Paul can. And I think if they leave him open as well on the 3-point line, that's another person who is at least, consistently throughout his career, even at 39 years old, been more consistent than Trey Jones, as much as we really liked Trey Jones's end of the season shooting wise. Does that make sense there?
100%. And I was rewatching a playoff game in 2015, Spurs versus Clippers. This dude was lacing it from deep. And I've always remembered him being a guy that can knock down an open jump shot. So I'm not worried about his floor spacing at all. And just to touch on one thing that neither of us did just now is his defense. Or sorry, did you get into his weaknesses yet?
I did not. I did
Okay,
not.
then let me throw it back to you because I'm sure you'll bring it up.
Well, no, honestly, you can jump right into the defense, man.
All I was going to say is defensively, sure, he doesn't have the same step to kind of keep up with a lot of these high athletic guards. I'm thinking Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, guys like that, Luka Doncic. However, he's still one of the highest IQ help defenders of all time. And as far as communication and forcing guys to be in the right spot, he is elite. So in that regard, I think we'll be better. But as far as just physically one-on-one sitting in the chair, it'll probably be just about the same as it's been in the past with Trey Jones.
I think that's a very fair point. You know, when it comes to him, the only weaknesses that you can say, it's not because of anything skill based. It's literally just because he's 39 years old.
Mhm.
Um, and that just comes down to athleticism, quickness, you know, a lot of the guards that we've talked about in this league. But I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see what we do with who defends some of those guys. This kind of goes back to the whole Sohan thing. You know, maybe we will still see a little bit of that as much as we did expect to see Stephon Castle doing much more of that this season when he got drafted. But at that time, we didn't realize we were going to sign Chris Paul.
Right.
So, you know, next season, we will see Stephon Castle taking on those guys, you know, completely. And maybe we do see some rotations where we have some spot minutes with both of those guys on the floor. And Stephon can pick up some of those guys. But again, it just really comes down to defense. And it's like you said, it's not an IQ thing. It's not a communication thing. It's just an athleticism thing for a 39-year-old. And
Exactly.
the one thing I want to touch on when you talked about communication, I know we've mentioned this in past episodes, but if you guys haven't seen it, go check out the video that Wake Forest posted when CP3 went to practice, because he talked to the team and it's on video, and he's saying, hey, like, y'all are good defenders. Y'all just got to communicate. Y'all don't talk. That is exactly what you just kind of hit on there.
Mm.
And I think if he can influence the rest of the team to do that, that will improve our team defense, which will therefore kind of help him out in a way as well.
100% agreed.
But we got a comment here from our boy Cowboy Tanaka. He says, how easy would the transition to a young team for
Mm.
CP3 be? Will he connect to the roster? I'll answer this one first, Ethan. Because he chose to do this and was convinced to do it by Pop, he talked about that in his presser over the summer after he signed. And he also talked about playing time, how that was something that was really important for him in this stage of his career. You know, this kind of goes back to what I just mentioned with the Wake Forest practice. He wants to be a coach. This is almost not to say he's going to be an assistant coach, but he almost kind of will to an extent. And it goes back to when Tony Parker said he didn't want to be an assistant coach, which is why he went to the Charlotte Hornets. I know I'm kind of going all over the place there, but back
Mm.
to Chris Paul. Again, he wanted to do this. The appeal of Victor Wembanyama, and the fact that like this was his decision gives
Mhm.
me confidence that he's going to be okay with this. I know we talked about it. There probably still will be some little things that come out about maybe him getting into it with some guys at practice and stuff. We made that prediction in the last episode. But at the end of the day, that's just going to be to push the guys, which is exactly what Greg Popovich would do as well, in a sense, whenever it's getting on to guys in practice. So I think because he wants to have that career in coaching, and this was something that he had a lot of other teams that he could have gone to, or maybe not a lot, but he had a handful of other teams that he could have gone to, I'm sure, and decided to do this. That gives me confidence that he's going to be able to connect to this roster. Another thing, Chris Paul does have an AAU team,
Right.
and he's had that for a while. And I know that the AAU guys are obviously younger than the Spurs roster, but still, he has a lot of experience coaching and connecting with young players as well.
I'll put it simple. He did it already. He did it with OKC and he did it again with Phoenix. So he can do it with us.
Yeah, the Shea Gilgeous thing, I forget about that too. That is a great example.
Mm.
But yeah, any final thoughts on Chris Paul?
No, sir. I'm extremely excited. Watching that 2015 playoff game got me even more hyped because I know he's not the same guy, but he was still elite.
Yeah, our man Alejandro Morales, one of the SSPN OGs, says,
Mm.
I hated Clippers CP3. Don't we all for that shot?
Yep.
Uh, Especially him in the open three. Quite a full circle moment.
Really.
That is so true. You know, I have a friend of mine who has a parent who has been a Spurs fan their whole life, and they hate CP3. They've always hated CP3. But now
Hmm.
he's here. And honestly, it's kind of the perfect time with the situation for the Spurs.
Agreed.
But that brings us to the backup point guard, who is Trey Jones, who had
Mm.
a really solid end to last season. And I think I'll just dish it to you to start off here. We're just hoping that he can continue the flashes that we saw at the end of the season.
Right. That end of the season run was great for him. And the thing that I think is a guarantee from Trey Jones is under control play. Again, facilitating. A lot of his strengths will be the same as CP3. He just doesn't have the experience or the elite IQ of a Hall of Fame point guard yet. You know, maybe eventually he can get to that point, but CP3 is in a class of his own. But I think if he can continue to make strides as a 3-point shooter, just a spot up shooter, He showed us flashes of that. Like you said, he was in the high 30% range for us and became a consistent shooter. If he can continue that for a full year, then he will be an outstanding backup. And I think where he struggled early last year was coming in off the bench because, like you said, he didn't have an elite scorer or a guy that could go one on one in isolation situations to take some of the ball pressure off of himself. And he can't necessarily create his own shot. I think our new bench unit, where he will have more weapons around him for an entire season and an entire off season, will kind of alleviate some of that struggle. I'm thinking guys like Keldon Johnson. He'll have Zach Collins next to him as well. Stephon Castle and maybe Malachi Brandon, maybe Blake Wesley. Who knows who that last guy is in that rotation, or Mamu Kelashvili. But either way, the cohesiveness of that second unit should be more fluid coming into the year, which will alleviate some of that struggle. And his defensive struggle, I think, will always be there just because of his size and athleticism. But if he can learn from Chris Paul as far as being a communicator, like we just talked about, and being a connective piece defensively, then we won't necessarily have to worry about that as much. I know he doesn't have an elite shot blocker behind him like Chris Paul will in that starting lineup, but I think Trey has the tools, and he's even a little bit more physical than Chris Paul. So if he can learn some of those traits, I think that will be less of a struggle for him.
And I believe Trey Jones is another guy who's still just 24 years old. Let me double check that. I believe he's 23, 24, around that range. Yes, so 24 years old. So, I mean, that's another guy who's just entering his prime. I
Right.
know it's been a struggle over these past 2 seasons, but you've got to remember the context as well. I think, you hit on pretty much everything that I was thinking as well there, Ethan. The biggest thing for me is, like you said, the communication, the things that CP3 is going to teach him, because I think he has a lot of those, he has the skill set. It's just, kind of putting it all together, if
Right.
that makes sense. And I think CP3 can help out with that a lot. We're not saying that he's going to turn into the next Chris Paul, but I think he can definitely teach Trey some things to elevate his play as a point guard with the positive flashes that we've seen, even before the end of the season. Like throughout all the struggles, there were still things that we maintained that Trey
Mhm.
Jones did well. He was always a true point guard, had that Duke kind of foundation. But the main thing is when it comes to the defense, because that's the biggest thing whenever it comes to Trey Jones. Like you said, the IQ that he'll learn. But for me, I just look at Stephon Castle's going to be next to him.
True that. True that.
And that goes back to the bench unit. We may even see some rotations where Harrison Barnes is playing off the bench as
True.
well at the backup four. We'll have to see how all those rotations turn out. You never know what injuries are going to pop up that could,
Champagny.
mess it right, that could change rotations. But I think overall, the bench unit is going to be better. And when you look at the beginning of last season, it wasn't just the bench unit that was struggling. It was also the starting lineup that was struggling. So the rotations overall for the team got better as the season progressed. And
Mhm.
when you factor in adding Stephon Castle, I just really think that's going to make a big impact on top of the things that CP3 is going to teach everybody. And even if it is Mamu, I still think that will also be a better supporting cast, and they'll have some size in the front court as well.
Agreed. And I think Trey's gotten consistent with that floater game, but if he can pick up that elbow fadeaway jumper from Chris Paul, that would be a game changer for him. Because right now he either only has that floater or he's coming off the screen and passing it. Like he really doesn't have anything else to his game. So if he can just get that 15-foot jump shot to fall, it'd be crazy for his development.
Yeah, and same with just being consistent like he
Yeah,
was at the end of the season with hitting open threes as well when they give it
for
to him.
sure. For sure.
M Easy brings up a question which I think is relevant to this conversation. How many games are they going to sit CP3 to keep him fresh?
Hmm.
So I'm going to say that he's going to play around 60 games. So I guess that would be about 20 or so, maybe a little bit less.
I'm gonna go with 70 games he plays.
Okay.
And barring injury, assuming he's healthy, because I really
Right.
don't think he's gonna play that many minutes. Like, I think he'll be 25 a game for the most part, unless, like, we're really in a competitive game going into
Right.
overtime and we just need his veteran presence, but that's my assumption for him because he is trying to prove that he's still a valuable piece to a competitive team.
Yeah, we'll definitely see him rest some games because of his age is the bottom line.
Mhm.
And the other thing that we've got to remember too is this, as we started this conversation, this really kind of is a passing of the torch, if you will, to Stephon Castle after
Right.
this season. So as the season goes on, you might see some more staggered minutes. You might just see some games where maybe they start Stephon, to kind of prepare him for that role next season. And that'll be a game that CP3 sits out and he's kind of on the sideline, giving them advice, all that type of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I could totally be wrong there. It could be more than that. I think the point that you hit on the minutes is a really good one as well. I'd be surprised if there's a lot of 38, 35-minute plus
Yeah.
games from Chris Paul this season. Again, especially when we're trying to kind of gradually move Stephon Castle into that role. And we do have Trey Jones still to pick up those minutes, who has starting experience as well.
Sorry, I'm just trying to
No, you're
check.
good.
Oh, okay, I was completely off. I was curious how many minutes a game Jason Kidd was getting his last couple years in the league,
Ooh, that's a
because
good comp.
that's who I'm thinking this is kinda like. Jason Kidd his last
Hmm.
couple years in Dallas and then New York, and he actually went 33, 29, 27 his last 3 years, so but again, different era, I guess. That
But
was
that's kind of what you were saying at the same time, around that 30-minute range.
yeah, yeah, slightly less, and I think in this era.
Right. And that would be around 27,
Yeah,
29.
yeah,
We're
yeah, let's
probably
go with
still
that.
there.
Let's go with that.
RK fan 1012 says dream scenario. I would love to see CP3 be the starting point guard during most of the season, but gets taken over late in the season by Castle. Maybe I'm just high on Stephon. I don't think that it's necessarily that. That's kind of what we just alluded to, RK. I think that's kind of the Spurs blueprint for this
Mhm,
season. Now, obviously, if the Spurs do find themselves in the play in, I think you will see Chris Paul starting in that game and playing
mhm.
minutes for sure. But you're going to see Stephon throughout the season as well. And, as much as we talk about Trey Jones being that kind of certified backup point guard, I think there will be a lot of situations where we'll see Stephon taking the ball up the floor because, again, after this season, he's going to be the point guard of the future as of right now.
100% agreed.
And that brings us to the final name on this list. And I know that we're talking about Stephon Castle being a point guard so much in this episode, and we're not going to talk about him, but that's just because this season, for the most part, he's most likely going to play the two off the bench next to Trey Jones. Like we just mentioned, you may see him in those minutes in the starting lineup. Or even off the bench as the starter in the games where CP3, is resting. But today, we're going to finish off the episode with Blake Wesley. And I know Blake Wesley is someone who is also a combo guard and can kind of play both ways. But if we had to choose between who are we going to label as a point guard, Malachi Branham or Blake Wesley, I went with Blake
Blake.
Wesley. So tell me your thoughts on Blake Wesley going into this season now that we have Stephon Castle and Chris Paul on the roster.
Minutes just got a whole lot scarcer or more scarce for poor Blake Wesley. And it's a shame because last year I really felt like he took a lot of strides in a lot of positive areas, primarily defense. That was something that was not a strength of his when we drafted him. It was not a strength of his
Mm-hmm.
when his first season. It became his main strength last year as a ball pressure point guard that was just scrappy, fighting over screens, swiping at the ball, playing passing lanes, and honestly developing his IQ as a defensive player and a help defender. So that became his number one thing, and I think that will continue to be the case, especially as minutes become harder to come by. But his weaknesses, they've been pretty much the same: finishing at the rim and shooting. I think weirdly his mid range jump shot is probably the strongest part of his offensive game, and I feel like that's the last thing for most guys to develop. But
Mm-hmm.
for him, it's finishing through contact with layups and just knocking down wide open threes. Oftentimes he bricks them, especially if he's moving. I think he was probably low 20% last season.
I'll
I
go
don't have the
check that.
exact number in front of me, but I do love the energy that he plays with. It's a shame that I mean, it's a shame for him. It's obviously positive for us and for the Spurs franchise that we made moves in ways to be more competitive by bringing in Chris Paul, bringing in Harrison Barnes. But I really doubt he will have meaningful minutes in these games unless we're getting blown out or we're resting guys like Chris Paul.
So he shot
There we go.
21.8% from three last season. Let me get the total numbers if I can. Maybe I cannot. Okay. Wow. So for reference, in 2022-23, he took the same amount of field goals overall and took just three less threes. He was 20 for 52 in his rookie season at
Mhm.
38.5%. And last season, he was 12 for 55 at 21.8%. Now, I think, again, we don't need to rehash this completely, but that I think ties into the Victor effect. Obviously, there was a lot of congestion and
Mhm.
clunkiness for a lot of the guys not knowing where to go or exactly what to do with Victor on the team. But still, when you talk about his defense, that was a bright spot that continued to develop throughout the season. Um, the other thing that I'll say on top of the offensive stuff that you said, which I completely agree with, getting better at the 3-point shooting and finishing at the rim, just the ball control as
There we go.
well when
That's a
he's
good one.
handling it. And I think we did see a jump
Mhm.
in, with less turnovers, at least on the eye test. From his rookie season to this year, I think he was more controlled, but you still would see him lose the ball at times. But here's the thing about Blake Wesley. You know, as much as he may not be the flashiest name on this roster, especially with all of the guys that we've brought in, like we alluded to at the beginning of this portion talking about him, he does have elite speed.
He
Like
does.
that is an elite trait, and not everybody has an elite trait. You know, I mean, you could look at Malachi. I hate to make this comparison, but like, do you see something that is for sure elite? You
Mhm.
know, even if it's just one little thing. Now, with that being said, again, it has to be honed, but I'm just saying I'm not selling my Blake Wesley stock yet, Ethan. And maybe, he doesn't even, maybe he just is kind of, a depth piece for us. But with how young he is, and as well as, like I said, the skills that he does have and the things that he's struggling with are things that can be improved on, you know, and,
Mhm.
and it was just his second season. So, again, I don't know how many reps he's going to get during the season to kind of prove this. That's going to be something that I'm really interested to see how the Spurs handle that. Like, will we see him in the G League again? Just so, like he's still playing. I don't know. That's going to be something that we'll see with kind of him and Malachi. That's something that I'll be watching as much as it's not the sexiest topic when it comes to this team.
Right, that's probably the most unknown storyline as far as, the actual, like, rotational pieces is what's gonna happen with Blake and Malachi Branham next season, especially with minutes being harder to come by. I'm the president of the Blake Wesley fan club, you know this, Jude. So if anybody wants him to work out and is holding onto their stock, it's gonna be me. I love the energy that he plays with, I like his mindset, but at some point, he is gonna need to kind of harness some of those skills and show us that he's been working on a little bit of his offensive game and not just at a certain point being a high energy player kind of runs out, especially as you become more competitive.
For sure. The other thing that I'm remembering here is Trey Jones is on the last year of
True.
his contract. So, that could be a reason that, Blake Wesley, if he were to really show out this season, like I said, that would probably have to be behind the scenes if we're
Yeah.
just being completely honest. Maybe he could earn that backup point guard position going into next year if we just want to save some money, keep that rookie contract.
Right.
And again, we've still got to pay Jeremy Sohan and Victor Wembanyama down the line. Personally, I don't think that's likely, but that is something that could be a possibility to keep in mind. And that kind of ties into Cowboys' comment over here where he said, I want to keep Blake until CP3 is gone. But again, the other flip side of that is Stephon Castle is still there too. But if Chris Paul and Trey Jones are gone, that would leave Stephon and and Blake
Who's the best point guard in terms of just controlled play
on the team.
ever? Like
Ooh.
all time. It's probably John Stockton actually, but
Okay.
Chris
Right.
Paul's up there is
I
what I'm
was
getting
gonna
at.
say, are you saying Chris Paul?
Chris
Yeah.
Paul's up there. Let's give him top 5, just make it vague.
Right, right. At
So if
least.
if there's anybody that can learn from Chris Paul, it's Blake Wesley as well. Like, we forget about that. He's not just there to teach Stephon and Victor. Like, he's also going to be,
And Malachi for that matter.
yes, Malachi, Blake, pretty much anybody that handles the ball. Chris Paul is going to be a mentor for.
Yep. I think that sums it up perfectly there, my guy. That was something I also forgot about. You never know what Chris Paul's teachings can
Mm,
do for some of these other young guys too. They're just too young for me to give up on, especially
right.
when you consider the circumstances of the past 2 seasons. As much as last year was rocky for a lot of guys on the surface.
Agreed.
That pretty much wraps up this episode, my guy. But I do have one thing that I forgot to mention last episode that I'm not going to forget to mention today. And this will be a little bit of a surprise to you. So I know a lot of you guys are in the San Antonio area. And even if you're not, your San Antonio Spurs fans. You got love for SA. And there is a new SA artist out there that Ethan and I know pretty well. He's a friend of ours. And y'all should check out his new album. His name is DeHart. If y'all like hip hop, it's DAHART. He just dropped his first album, Ink Pens. He's got a couple singles out as well. He's doing a performance in SA live tonight, actually.
What?
So I don't know if any of y'all will be able to get out to that, but definitely keep your eyes open. But SSPN started when me and Ethan met in college, and this was a friend of ours, kind of from that same friend group, and he dropped his first album a couple weeks ago. I meant to mention it last week, and it just slipped my mind when we were talking about everything. But as much as this is a little bit of an SSPN connection plug, he is a new San Antonio artist on the rise. So if you like hip hop, you like some boom bap rap, not too crazy, some more chill stuff. As much as he does have one song on there that goes pretty ham. I'll just leave it at that. But for the most part, a lot of versatility, a lot of that stuff. I could go on a music rant forever, but y'all should go check out Ink Pens by DeHart.
In terms of control, he's up there with one of the best of them.
Yes, exactly. Just like CP3 on the
Just
mic,
like CP.
facilitating everything.
Great basketball mind too. Does he drop any basketball bars in there, Jude? Have you listened to the
Yes,
lyrics? Yeah?
yes, he does. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting. Oh, he drops a Danny Granger line.
Oh, snap. Does it rhyme with
Mm,
danger?
I don't think so. I'm forgetting the
Okay.
exact. It took me a second to think of it, but yes, there's some other ones in there I think too, because he himself has a former basketball background. I'll leave it at that. But there are some basketball bars in there as well.
All right. All right. I like that. Shout out my guy.
Any final thoughts before we wrap this one up?
Just to mention him, Malachi Flynn will not be on the official team. And that's all I will say.
Yeah, we saw your comments in there, MEZ, but there was a past episode where we kind of talked about that. Look, I'm not trying to hate too much on Malachi Flynn. We definitely like the competition that he's going to bring to training camp, but I would be surprised if he ends up making the roster. Maybe we'll be proven wrong, but I think that like Brandon Boston, he will just kind of be a young training camp guy that will bring value, for competition reps in training camp.
Al Farouk Aminu.
Chandler Hutchinson season.
Chandler Hutchinson time, baby. I love it.
Well, okay, before we wrap up, any final thoughts on the point guard position as a whole? We talked about all three of them. Any thoughts on it overall?
I think it's exciting. I think we have a lot more consistency and looking back into when we were competitive back in the day, 2014 through 2017, it was elite point guard play that kind of led the way. Like, sure, we had Hall of Fame players like Timmy, Kawhi, Manu, but Tony Parker at that point guard spot, Patty Mills, like we had elite ball handlers, and I think we're kind of getting back to that area.
I just think the structure,
Yeah.
of the position, as well as what Chris Paul is going to do for all the other guys on the roster, including, two guards that we'll talk about next week in Stephon Castle and Malachi Branham. And shoot, even Devin Vassell to an extent. We've seen
Mhm.
him kind of take the ball up the floor more at times and have some more playmaking ability. I think for the guard position as a whole, he's just going to do a lot of positive things that will
Yep.
just help everything be orchestrated better offensively.
Good word. Orchestrated. It's a great one.
Well, we appreciate you guys for checking in, hanging out, and being here for our first position breakdown for the 2024-25 NBA season. And if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button below. And if you want to stay updated with everything, follow us on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. We appreciate you guys. We'll catch y'all on the next one. Go Spurs, go.